10 years in control of Gaza and 10 years under siege. Hamas appears to only be digging in harder against its occupier, Israel. The group has elected Yahya Sinwar to lead its political faction in Gaza, a prominent military leader. Sinwar was among 1,027 prisoners freed by Israel in 2011 in exchange for Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit.
He's somebody who spent about 25 years in the prison. He has a good character. He's strong. He's hardliner.
Ahmed Yusuf was an advisor to Sinwar's predecessor, Ismail Haniyeh. He says the election of Sinwar marks a departure from a traditional politician.
You know that there is a big difference between somebody who's a militant, who's leading the movement, and somebody who's a politician. And this is making the people afraid that maybe the militant will take us for another war soon or something like this. I'm afraid that will giving the Israeli the ammunition to stigmatize Gaza with extremism and also demonizing the people of Gaza.
But some leaders within the group dispute that view.
We are a resistance movement. Whether we are playing in politics, education, military activities, all of us are target for the Israel. So I think there will be no change in the policy of Hamas.
Ask almost anyone here, and they'll say that they soon expect another Israeli offensive, something Hamas says it's been preparing for day and night. Hamas's military strength has grown in the near 10 years since it took over Gaza, while living conditions for everyday people have grown harder, something that's cast the group's popularity with Gaza's 2 million people into question.
A rare public challenge to Hamas's governance of the Strip. Hundreds of people in January took to the streets to protest power outages, something which many in Hamas blame on Palestinian Authority leader Mahmoud Abbas.
The electricity is mainly by the policy of Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas is trying, in particular, to pressure Hamas. He believing that the people are going to protest against them, and this will pave his way to come back. This is just imagination, because we are living in this siege since more than 10 years.
But for many young Palestinians, there's plenty of blame to go around.
Everyone is guilty, whether it be President Mahmoud Abbas or Hamas or the other parties.
Saeed Lulu graduated from university in 2007, the same year Hamas was elected and the siege came into effect. After a number of failed attempts to find and keep a job, Saeed went on hunger strike for almost 3 weeks.
My hunger strike ended in Al-Auda hospital in the northern Gaza Strip. I stayed there for 5 days. I was motivated to shine a light on my cause and the cause of tens of thousands of Palestinian youth who can't find work, who want to emigrate, who want to commit suicide.
During the first 5 months of 2016, we had about 6 cases of young men who have very violently killed themselves, which means either burning themselves on fire or simply hanging themselves. And we think that these young men are basically sending a very clear message of anger towards the community.
After a decade under siege and 3 Israeli offensives, Gaza's youth are growing restless with a lack of opportunity. Hamas's new leader will not only have to address the threat of another Israeli incursion, but the prospect of a lost generation. Randolph Nogel, the Newsmakers in Gaza.
I'm joined now from Gaza by Hamas official Dr. Bassem Naim. He's a former health minister and advisor to a former prime minister of Gaza. Dr. Naim, thanks so much for joining us. We're all trying to understand what kind of leader Yahya Sinwar is and how different he will be to his predecessor, Ismail Haniyeh. What kind of leader will he be?
Yahya Sinwar is one of the Palestinians who were grown up in Khan Yunis refugee camps, and he have seen in his own eyes and on his skin the injustice of the occupation towards his people. Therefore, he grown up under these circumstances. Therefore, we are talking about a very a firm leader in defending the Palestinian rights, but at the same time, he's a very humble, very simple, very open-minded and pragmatic leader in Hamas.
So, you say, a man who grew up with the injustices of the occupation, he's also been shaped by incarceration. He was in jail for a long, long time. The Qassam Brigades is a part of his DNA, right? And he's a man known for allegedly killing suspected collaborators. So with all of that in mind, you say he's a hard man, a firm man. With all of that in mind, would you accept that some people would be skeptical of how open he will be to reconciliation, for example, with Fatah and the PA, and that maybe this is going to be a hardline guy who's not open to discussion and open to diplomacy?
I think this is not right, and this is the Israeli narrative after the new elections in Hamas to show that Hamas have chosen a very tough and stupendous and hardliner as a message towards the internal relationships and towards the external relationship. I think this is not true. This is not the reality. We are talking about a very open-minded, a very pragmatic leader, especially if we are talking about the internal relationships, about reconciliation and achieving the unity inside the Palestinian community and towards our neighbors, I mean the Arabic and Islamic countries, especially Egypt. But if you talk about the occupation and if you talk about the injustice towards the Palestinian along 70 years, not only Yahya Sinwar is a hardliner. I think you will never find in Hamas or maybe in most of the Palestinian a soft liner towards the occupation. If you live here in Gaza and understand what does it mean to be besieged for more than 10 years, every day slow killing of 2 million people, converting Gaza Strip into the biggest open prison on earth, I think to defend our rights, to be a hardliners towards the occupation, this is the expected from anyone
and that's
who
a good
is
point.
living under such conditions.
Let's just expand on this, and this is what people are trying to understand, because they understand that Hamas is a broad organization and it's a varied organization. So there's the Hamas of services, there's the Hamas that many Palestinians who are besieged, blockaded, and under occupation, many Palestinians see as an organization that gives them dignity and resistance against occupation. There's also a Hamas that encourages the stabbing attacks and the car rammings and killings of civilians. And so people are trying to figure out which Hamas is Mr. Sinwar more closely representing or representative of. Is it the militant wing and Qassam, or is it diplomacy, or is it a bit of both?
I think we have to emphasize 2 points. First, Yahya Sinwar is not a new leader who has been sporadically elected as a leader of Hamas in Gaza. Yahya Sinwar was a leader for many years inside the jail, leading Hamas prisoners inside the jail. Second, Yahya Sinwar was since 2012 a member of political bureau of Hamas here in Gaza, and he was responsible for many portfolios, including Qassam brigades. But at the end, he is part of the political leadership of Hamas. This is one point. The second point, we have to assert and to emphasize that Hamas is not a regime which led by one man. It is not a one-man show. Hamas is a big organization led by a collective leadership from the region in Gaza, the Hamas members in the diaspora or leadership in the diaspora, Hamas in the West Bank, and Hamas in the prisons. Therefore, we are not talking about a man who can do anything. Now, we are talking about a member of a leadership.
And then that's
sure,
a good
he
point.
will
Yes.
have his
Sorry to interrupt
own...
you. Yes, that's a good point. It's not, Hamas isn't a dictatorship, and you
But
made that clear.
I want to correct something. I want to correct
Go ahead.
something.
Go ahead.
Hamas, because you have said Hamas is encouraging stabbing and killing of civilians. This is not true for two reasons. First, we are talking about occupation, and Palestinians have the right to resist their homes, their country, their rights. You cannot, for example, yesterday we have seen a black comedy when we see a soldier who killed a wounded Palestinians who has been sentenced only for 18 months, and the Israeli courts sentencing young girls who have a knife in their hands for 10, 15 years.
That's a good point, Dr. Naim. Dr. Naim, but we can go down this rabbit hole debating over who's a civilian and who's not, and I don't want to right now because I have a few more pressing questions regarding looking ahead, particularly in terms of foreign policy.
Yes,
I don't want to
please.
go into the kind of who's a civilian and who's not. We'll do it another time. In terms of Hamas's foreign policy, so as things stand, there's the blockade, there's the occupation. So you have the blockade from the Israeli and the Egyptian side. Many countries that have a big say in the future of peace and justice, whether it's the Israelis, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Americans, the UK, still consider Hamas a terrorist organization, or at the very least, the Qassam Brigade's a terrorist organization. Mr. Sinwar himself is designated on the State Department's list. You said he's a pragmatic leader. I wonder, given that that is the status quo, the occupation is still around, the blockade is still around, those countries still don't want to do business with you, is it time to take a different approach?
Again, I have said the policy of Hamas and the strategy of Hamas is decided by the leadership of Hamas and not by one man. Second, when the Americans consider Hamas, which resisting the occupation and defending the rights of Palestinians as a terror organization, this is the business of the Americans. This should not be the truth, because at the same time, when the Americans consider Hamas or Qassam Brigade as terrorists, they are supporting many armed groups around the world, in Iraq, in Syria, in Somalia, everywhere. It is the definition of the Americans for what is right and what is wrong, but it should not be the definition of the international community. Hamas was besieged after 2006 only because the Palestinian people decided to choose freely and transparently Hamas as a leader for Palestinian people after failure of the political path led by Mr. Abbas and his organization Fatah, which we have seen lastly, that it is a clear failure of this way to negotiate with the occupation.
I want to ask about Iran, because Hamas's relationship with Iran has been interesting over the past few years, has changed seemingly since the beginning of the Syrian war. Hamas was very close to Iran before the Syrian war began. Now the relationship is a bit more different. Tell me what Hamas's current relationship with Iran is right now, because Iran is the main backer of Bashar al-Assad.
I have to say the pivot of our policy is Palestine. Anyone, any organization, any state who is supporting Palestine and the rights of Palestinians of freedom and independence and statehood, he is our friend. He is a friend of Palestine, and therefore we have no objection against anyone who is supporting Palestinian. Iran, Egyptians, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, any country who is, this is the center of our strategy, is Palestine. Anyone who is supporting us at the civilian level, at the political level, at the resistance level, this is another story. But anyone, this is the center of our policy. Palestine and the resistance of the occupation.
Dr. Naim, there was a massive war in December 2008, January 2009, another massive war in Gaza in 2014 in the summer, terribly awful particularly for the civilians of Gaza. Things haven't changed politically on the ground. Are you fearful of or preparing for another big war with the Israelis?
From our side, the policy is fixed. We are not looking for any escalations. We are not trying to provocate anyone. We are looking how to break down this siege, how to lift the siege around Gaza, how to help our people in the West Bank, especially regarding increasing buildings of settlements, Judaization of Jerusalem. But at the same time, again, we are not looking for an escalation. But if we are attacked, I think we are preparing ourselves for defending our people in Gaza or outside Gaza Strip, inside the historical Palestine.
Bassem Naim, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.